Hello, good day, everyone. I would like to welcome and encourage you all to watch our Egyptian Banking Institute's webinar for today. It's titled as The New Normal, a Threat or an Opportunity. We're very delighted to welcome our Egyptian Banking Institute's guest speaker today, Mr. Darren Franks. So let me introduce him to you. Mr. Darren is one of the most passionate and inspiring leaders in the field of talent acquisition and strategies. He's the co-founder of Talentinthecloud, which was launched in 2016. Talentinthecloud is actually a specialized entity in designing, building, and operating talent acquisition programs and strategies for some of Africa's fastest growing fintechs. I'd like to add further that Mr. Darren has a vast diversified experience acquired from working in the field of talent acquisition at international recruitment businesses across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Now, about today's webinar, it's considered a unique opportunity to have Darren for exploring the impact of COVID-19's outbreak on talent across Africa. Darren shall spot some hidden opportunities in the crisis that the globe is currently witnessing. So please pay attention to our international experts' views and thoughts during this webinar. Darren, thanks for being with us today, and the microphone is all yours.
Yasmin, thank you so much, and thank you to you and your colleagues for having me. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I know we were meant to meet in person earlier on in the year in Cairo, and unfortunately, due to the world going crazy, we weren't able to do so. So hopefully, this is the next best thing to me being there in person. And thank you for the very kind introduction. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And if everyone could just let me know that they can see that would be wonderful. I promise I'm not going to just go through slide by slide. It's just a few pointers actually for me more than anyone else. But I've been asked by Yasmin and the team to talk today on, again, what is the new normal? And I hate to keep using these phrases and unprecedented times and the new normal. And unfortunately, it is a reality. And I think it's important that we do talk about what is going to be the result of this pandemic from a fintech, from a talent perspective, because there have been some sizable shifts in terms of what businesses are doing, how they're looking at talent, how they're retaining talent, and how they're going to grow moving forward. So I've spent, I'll give you a bit of intro to me. I know Yasmin covered that off, but a bit of information. So as Yasmin said, I've spent the last 20 odd years working in international search. Started my career off in the UK, working in London, and then moved to Dubai in 2007. So I was witness to the big exodus that happened during the financial crash, and from what I'm reading at the moment, it looks like that's coming up again. So I spent a long time in the Middle East. I was there for 7 years. I was working with MNOs, with banks, and most of my time was spent working with sovereign wealth funds. So that gave me good exposure to sort of the investment world. In 2016, actually, I missed a bit because I moved to Africa. I moved to South Africa in 2013, 2014, and exited my last business and then set up Talentinthecloud in 2016. Really just to try and do something a little bit different, but with a focus specifically on the African fintech sector. So that's north, south, east and west of the continent. And it's been a remarkable journey, but this isn't about me today. This is about you and your businesses. Just a little bit more information on one thing just to mention as well. So I do speak at events, COVID-19 permitting, and I'm sorry, I've got my screen up here. I can't remember the next bit. I'm also a big champion of diversity, so gender diversity across the sector. I work very, very closely with the African women in fintech and payments, host numerous events, and also part of their board. I've also just recently been appointed to Findexable, which is a global index for fintech companies across the planet. So if you are a fintech and you're interested in finding out what other businesses are doing in other locations, or even checking out your competitors, please do have a look at Findexibles. That's findexible.com. And lastly, I'm also involved in a very early stage startup around virtual reality training and virtual reality conferences and exhibitions. So quite timely with everything that's going on. On the left, you can see just some of the companies I've been working with, or my business has been working with over the years. I'm sure you'll recognize a few there, and it covers remittances, payments, and what we're seeing really over the last few months is a big demand now for traditional banks to accelerate their digital transformation programs, and that has a big effect on talent, which we're going to come on to shortly. So I put this slide together back in April. Actually, I was doing another webinar, and what I was using this slide for was really just to look at what people are feeling. So people who are working in the sector, if you're a manager or a director of a business or an owner of a business, this is what your staff are more than likely feeling. And interestingly, when we looked and when we spoke to CEOs, this is what they're feeling as well. So this isn't just about people working in the sector. Everyone was feeling this. You know, there was so much confusion. People were panicking about job losses, about financial ruin. There was so much stress. It was very, very difficult. And I think because this happened so quickly, no one was able to prepare for anything that happened. And I do think people went into panic. Rightly so. I can completely understand that. There were some companies, and I certainly took some advice, not that I listened, which was, cut fast and cut deep. That was the advice I was given back in March. I decided against that for my businesses, and just sort of tighten the purse strings and perhaps not spend as much. But there was this big panic in the sector, and I'm fortunately we're nearly mid-June, and we've certainly seen a lot more activity happening, and I can talk to you about that and what that means a bit later on. But I think there's quite a bit more confidence across Africa in terms of what's happening. And look, we can't get away from this pandemic. I think a lot of countries have done very, very well to flatten the curve, to use an expression that was used a lot earlier on during the outbreak. And we can't get rid of coronavirus or COVID-19, but I think what countries have done is just suppress this so they could get ready for such a time where peak numbers are hitting, and they've got the hospitals and the PPE equipment and everything like that ready. So I think some economies, I live in South Africa. I have an office in South Africa, and we were on extremely hard lockdown here for 5-6 weeks, where we basically were not allowed out of the house, and that was tough, right? And again, e-commerce was kind of shut down as well. There was very limited things that you could buy, but over the last 4 or 5 weeks or so, some of the restrictions have been lifted, albeit the number of coronavirus cases have kind of skyrocketed, and they don't reckon they're going to hit peak in South Africa until September. So there's a long way to go. But some of the restrictions have eased, and that's obviously re-stimulated the economies here, specifically the digital economies and the e-commerce. So I do think now, if I was to redo this slide, I still think there is obviously some worry, some doubts, obviously some stress from various different businesses who haven't been able to make it through this pandemic. But I do think there is a bit more positivity now. I do think people are starting to see that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and this isn't going to last forever. And businesses can't stop. Banks can't stop. Loans companies can't stop giving loans. Especially when we're looking in Africa, where financial inclusion is such a key topic. To stop that, to stop all the hard work that so many companies and so many people have put into getting the unbanked banked in some way, shape or form, would just be heartbreaking. So I do think there is a lot more confidence. I do think that things will slowly start to recover. We're certainly seeing it in pockets. And don't forget the payments companies out there, the PSPs of this world, and the remittance companies. Some of them had record months in the last couple of months. I'll come on to some of the stats in a minute, but I do think that there's positivity moving forward. So I'm just going to go on. So my slides are a little bit slow, but I don't know what's happening. Here we go. So I've got some real data. So from during this sort of talk or my sort of presentation to you today, I'm not going on industry-wide data because I don't know where that's come from. I can't guarantee the authenticity of it, but what I can do is guarantee the authenticity of the data that we've got as a business. And that's really what I'm going to talk to you about today. So over the last 3 weeks, I've spent an inordinate amount of time speaking to customers of ours, contacts of ours who are all leaders, senior leaders, working across the fintech sector, and that covers 9 countries at the moment. We haven't got quite round to the rest, but we're making some progress. And resoundingly, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, 82% of the people we spoke to, the business leaders we spoke to, believe their business will be stronger post the pandemic. Now, why is that? What does that actually mean? Is it just a case of profitability? Is that growth? Well, actually, it's all of those things. I mentioned just a moment ago that the payments companies and the remittance companies have seen exorbitant growth. That's going to continue. Or that's the belief that it's going to continue. Companies have also looked at this, saying, well, we don't necessarily need to spend certain amounts of money in certain areas, and perhaps we can pull that back and redistribute those funds into something that's a bit more tangible. So I do think that this has been a big shock and a big panic to everyone operating any type of business. But there are some fundamental learnings from this, and I'm pretty confident that a lot of businesses are going to come up a lot stronger. I'm going to apologize because you can probably hear my dogs barking. It's feeding time for my dogs, so apologies. I've asked them to behave, but they never listen, a bit like my kids. So the next, for me, kind of a new term, another new term, unprecedented times and the new norm, but the hybrid work model. What is that? So lots of companies were forced to work from home. A lot of financial services companies, certainly I know in Kenya and in Nigeria, and certainly here in South Africa, were given licensing to operate as normal because they're an essential service. However, not everyone went back to the office. So there was people working remotely, which for some businesses was completely alien. Granted, there are a lot of fintechs that do have remote teams and have remote development teams and product teams and what have you, but there are a number of, probably an overwhelming number of companies who are much more traditional, who have offices, maybe floors of offices, maybe multiple offices, and adapting, moving those people from sitting there in front of their desks with their colleagues to working from home, now with their animals, as you can hear, and their kids and their husbands and their wives, has been a huge challenge. But we also looked at how people are feeling in the sector. So this is not business leaders. This is people operating and working in financial services across the continent. I haven't got the stats here actually right on these slides, but I can tell you that 36% of those people that we surveyed actually said that working from home and the work-life balance was actually not a problem. It was actually quite enjoyable for them. So when we're talking to the CEOs and we're asking them, what is the future? What does that look like for your business in terms of offices? Many are saying they're going to adopt this hybrid model. So either you have the choice, the open choice to come to the office or work from home, or we'll have set days where we need certain teams in the office just to, I suppose, in some respects, comply to social distancing, but in others, just to give people a little bit more flexibility. Now, I think the challenge arises, and I had this challenge actually with one of the banks that I bank with, where I needed some statements, and I needed them stamped by the bank. Now, that particular bank in the UK, they were all working remotely, and they weren't allowed to take the stamp out of the office, so I couldn't get my stamped statements. So I do think from a traditional banking perspective, this could be a challenge. There's obviously certain risks involved with people working from home. I'm going to explore that a little bit more shortly. But again, 63% of people, leaders we spoke to, plan to adopt a hybrid model. And I think that's going to be an interesting one for the future. I'm just going to duck behind my screen because I can't remember what the next one was. Oh, yes. Okay. So culture. Now, this is a really interesting, for me, this is really interesting. You may not find it so, but, culture of a business. And we look at, we look at a lot of, everyone tends to look at the Facebooks and the Googles and the Twitters of this world that have slides and baristas and who knows what else in their offices. And I'm not saying that's what they do to form culture, but it's certainly a part of it. Fintechs tend to love foosball tables and beanbags and PlayStations and Xboxes. People need to start thinking a little bit more out of the box now, because you can't have that. You might have that at home, but you're not going to give all your staff PlayStations as a kind of sign-on gift or as a bonus. I don't know, maybe you will, but culture is going to become more and more important. And I think when you've got a nucleus of people, so your existing team, and then they go and work from home, they already know the culture of the business. They know the management style. They know what's expected of them. They know what their KPIs or SLAs are, whatever it may be. And that culture is already embedded in them, even if they've been with you for a short period of time. But what happens when you start to hire new people? How on earth do you get your culture across over a Zoom call? I mean, it's nigh on impossible. So we were talking to the CEO, saying, so what is the plan? The vast majority don't know. It's not because they haven't thought about it. In fact, it's one of the things that keeps them up at night. How are they going to keep this culture that they've worked so hard to build and maintain within their businesses? How are they going to instill that with new people joining? It's a tough one. And I don't have all the answers. I've got a few suggestions, but not all the answers. But then we move on to the downsizing of offices. I mean, this is over half of the people we spoke to said they have absolutely no intention of extending lease agreements beyond their natural expiry. A number of companies we've spoken to are trying to get out of leases, long-term leases, and either work co-share, so create a co-sharing type environments, or they're looking at, rather than having 10 floors in one city, it might be 10 cities with one floor, and perhaps not even that. I've certainly seen it in my business and the other businesses I'm involved in, that remote working actually can work really, really well. If you have the right collaboration tools and you have the right people with the right mindset, the right ethics, and the right drive, then actually it can be more. You can be more productive as a business with people not physically around. Again, I appreciate it's very different in the world of traditional banking, retail banking, but I do think I'm sure everyone has seen on social media, the biggest driver for innovation and digitization has not been any of these software companies, but has actually been COVID-19, and that's the truth. That's the harsh reality. That's exactly what's happened. Moving on, we're talking specifically about talent. So attrition, what does that mean? That's when people leave your business, whether it's natural attrition, maybe people are coming up to retirement age and retiring from the business, or not, they're being headhunted by competitors, or they're being moving to different sectors or different countries. So there is a worry, there is a concern, and I'm going to delve into that. That's really important. The why. Why is that going to happen? Why is that going to increase over time? And there are some things that I think people certainly need to be aware of. And the last one, I'm just going to duck behind my screen. Yeah. Almost 80% of people, 80% of businesses, I should say, that we've spoken to plan to hire remote talent. And that's a huge change. That's a massive change from certainly when I started working the African continent 9 years ago. Remote working was just unheard of. You have people coming to the office and they're expected to be there from 9 till 5 or 8 till 4 or whatever the hours may be. They're expected to be in the office, and having a remote team just was what they did over there somewhere, right? Or some of these companies tried to do. But I think over the last 5-6 years, we've seen big movements in the gig economy. So it's quite normal now if I need to get something designed and I don't have a designer in house, I'll go on to one of the shouldn't mention any names, one of the freelance platforms and find a freelancer that I can pay by the hour. I think more so when we're talking about fintech, we're talking traditionally more about sort of software development, which is obviously a skill that is in high demand. You can get the skill from anywhere now, and that hasn't changed. But I think the appreciation and the ability to manage remote teams has changed dramatically. And as I said to you early on, I'm involved in a startup business, a virtual reality business, and I've not met face to face any of the team. There's 13 people on this project. We've met over Zoom, and we have Slack, and we have all of these different collaboration tools, and it works perfectly fine. Had you have asked me this 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Absolutely not. One other interesting point while we're on this, I do work with a lot of private equity and venture capital firms. When I was looking at valuing a business a number of years ago, we were talking about having sort of concentration of people and a physical office, because people wanted to, or investors wanted something. If they're going to buy something, they wanted to buy something where they could see and they could walk in around the office and get the vibe. That's changed. And you can take it from me that private equity firms now, some of the biggest ones operating in Africa, have got investments in remote businesses. So that's changed. So there is no need now. If someone tells you, you have to have 50 people, 100 people, 200 people in one office to create value in your business, it's just not the case. And I don't think that's a direct result of COVID-19, but I certainly think that's brought it to the limelight, and the people are now starting to see that. So, I should have got a glass of water. I'm going to move on. Sorry, everything's a little bit slow. I would imagine it's probably my kids watching Netflix or something like that. But anyway, now we're going to talk about talent, and we're going to talk about where are we at and what has this situation really done for the African fintech financial services sector. So there's two sides of this. Some are saying it's now a war for jobs, that there are so many people that have been made redundant or retrenched, if you're familiar with that term. You look at the unemployment figures in the US, they're just mind-blowing, and we've certainly seen that in parts of Africa. There are some financial services companies that have downsized or right-sized, as the Middle East likes to, certainly some parts of the Middle East likes to refer it to. And there's been an abundance of people coming onto the market. So are we talking about a war for jobs? So are people now going to be fighting over jobs, again, supply and demand? Or are we still where we were in January and February, which was a war for talent, right? Talent is really hard to come by. And I'm talking about leadership talent and the people who can make a real difference to your business. I have my view on that. I think a bit of both, quite frankly. In perhaps the lower end of the pyramid, where we're looking at bringing people into a business at sort of entry level or what have you, is we're going to see a huge abundance of people applying for jobs. You can see on this slide here, we've really started to see this. I'll go through this in a moment. I do think, on the other hand, great talent, and I mean really great talent, is still going to be very, very hard hard to find, because people are keeping hold of them. They're looking at their retention strategies. The companies now may not have been thinking about hiring over the last month or two, in some respects, but they were certainly worried about retaining their key team, their key staff, and they've put in some interesting ways to retain talent. Let's just talk about this. Again, this is real data. This is data that we've got, and I can only verify, I can only guarantee what I'm showing you here. If you can see the grey line at the bottom, that's the amount of search mandates, so the amount of instructions that my primary business, Talentinthecloud, has taken on over the last 3 months. And then the yellow line indicates how many applications per position we've received. Now, we don't spend money on advertising. The only sort of advertising we do is on social media, and that's really more for branding than anything else. So if you imagine I spent money on Google AdWords or Facebook campaigns or some of the job boards, these numbers probably would have been 10x. But what it does show you is at the beginning of the year, there was an average probably about 110, I think it was, 110, 115 applications. So people actually applying for a job. And then you can see where we are today. I mean, this is just scary, right? So obviously the amount of mandates that we've taken on has increased, which is a great sign for the sector. But what's also happened is the amount of applications we've received has, 4 times the amount of what they were, just 12, 13 weeks ago. So that just proves, I think, what I mentioned earlier on, there is a war for talent. I'm not going to go into specifics over how many of those 432 were relevant for the role. Not a great deal, probably single-digit percentages, if that. People are desperate, and there are desperate times. So you'll certainly find that if you are advertising for a job in certain markets, you're going to get absolutely inundated with applications. So it's important you've got a process to manage that. And again, be cognizant and be conscious that people are, some people are in financial stress and really suffering home life and financially. So I think that the least that anyone can do is just an acknowledgement. I don't think people expect individual replies, with detailed feedback. That's impossible when you're dealing at these numbers. But it is important that you just go back to someone and acknowledge that you've received their details of their application, and you'll get back to them if it's, if there's a fit. Right. I really should have got some water. I'm sorry. Let me carry on. Sorry, my system's a bit slow. Right. So here we talk about supply and demand, and this really, I suppose, illustrates what I was talking about a little bit earlier on. So the roles at the top, so the departments at the top, marketing, HR, operations, finance. We look at those, and I'm not talking about chief marketing officers or HR directors or COOs or CFOs. I'm not talking at that level. I'm talking about accounts payable and receivable and operations. Whether it be in risk and compliance, etc., HR type of admin and marketing interns and what have you. So we're very much talking at that level. That's where we're going to see an abundance of people, and I think the supply will far outstrip the demand by a long way. But when we move down, I should say, when we move up to leadership roles, and specifically in product leadership, technology, and commercial. As well as risk, and I should have put risk in there as well. There is still going to be a demand, and there is still going to be a lack of supply. Why? Because great people are being really looked after by their businesses. They're very hard to get, and they're very hard to pull out and I think there's a lot of loyalty that perhaps people have built up as well over these last few months. Those companies that have treated their staff well have been communicative and have cared and showed some empathy. You'll find that that's brought quite a bit of loyalty and a bit of stickiness. That's certainly what I've been told by numerous people in the sector. They're not looking to move. They do feel they owe it to their employer to see them through the next 6 months at least, and ride the storm and see them through the other side. So you need to be thinking about what is your value proposition. If you're going out to the market, what is it you're going out to the market with? And it's a small place, and the world has got, I think I've just ruined my next slide, but the world has got a lot smaller. But also that the fintech sector is very, very, very small, right? People know things. People know how others have been treated. We've got social media where you probably saw there was a digital bank in the UK that you may have seen. There was a digital bank in the UK, and I won't mention any names. They let go, their entire team in Eastern Europe without any notice, without any pay, and just said, sorry, we don't need you anymore. And that was it. And it was cut and dry. Now, I appreciate that businesses do need to be agile and do need to do things right. But when you're a bank like this and you've just shouted from the rooftops that you've got X hundreds of millions of dollars of funding, and you then go and sack people straight away or fire people straight away without anything, that's not right. And word gets around, and it can tarnish your reputation. And I think, building reputation, it takes a long time to build, but it takes seconds to destroy. So again, I think people need to be conscious of that as well. Oh, there we go. I knew it was coming on to the world has got a bit smaller. It took me ages to try and find this, but let's talk about some of the positive things here now. And of course, there are two sides to this, but what does this mean? So the world has got smaller, but what do I mean by that? Well, I touched on it a bit earlier on. We now have access to remote workers. Now, they don't have to be in Cairo. They don't have to be in Kampala. They don't have to be in Nairobi. They can be anywhere. If I'm a fintech, I'm in South Africa, I don't need to worry now necessarily about importing talent, importing skills into South Africa, which is notoriously very, very difficult to get work permits for, and it's a minefield, right? But I don't actually need to think about that because I can work remotely. So my team can work remotely. So I've now got access or the ability to hire anyone globally. Now, obviously, linguistics, time zone, and cost are three big factors to this, okay? I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that, a fintech in Kampala goes and hires, a project manager in London. It probably doesn't make sense commercially. But what I am saying is that fintech in Kampala can quite easily go and hire talent in Cairo, or can hire talent in Nairobi or wherever else it may be, because the world has become more connected. And I'm sorry to keep using these terms, but they really are true and they're really significant. It means that organizations now are kind of borderless. Right? And I know we all talk about borderless payments and sort of the free trade zones across Africa, but from a talent perspective, there's huge opportunities, huge. No longer are you restricted to just hiring people who can get to your office, right? I spoke to many people last week in Lagos, in Nigeria, and they were saying, actually, we're saving maybe 4 hours a day. 4 hours a day in not having to commute. I mean, I don't know if anyone's been to Lagos, but the traffic is a nightmare. So think of that productivity gain that you've got. Now, because people aren't going into the office, now it makes no difference if they live on the island, or they live in central town, or they live in Abuja, or wherever they may live. It's irrelevant. If I've got someone that is 3 doors down from me, or is 300 miles away from me, it actually makes no difference. So that's something to really, really think about. How are you going to get the best people for whatever budgets you have set aside? And perhaps there's even some more you can do on the budget side. But if you're not, relocating people, you're not paying transportation allowances, you're not paying airfares. Obviously, probably seen that there's a bit of an exodus. I mentioned it a moment ago from Dubai. It's an expensive place to live. There is no support from the government, unless obviously you're an Emirati. But so there's talent. There's still going to be talent moving, but I think it's going to be a lot easier to access talent. Whether you are of the mindset that it's really important that whoever works for you works 100% for you, or whether you're a little bit flexible in saying, actually, I don't mind if they have another project on the side. That's fine, as long as they disclose it and there's no conflict of interest. Actually, that's fine, as long as I'm getting my output. Actually, I was talking to someone again, last week, and we were talking about culture. He said, look, we have a culture of output, deliverables. That's our culture. I don't care if someone has 5 jobs, as long as if they've committed to doing a certain thing by a certain time and they deliver, I'm absolutely fine with that. What they do in their other time is down to them. So people are starting to think this. Now, I mentioned risk. I think that's my next slide. I don't know why this is so slow this afternoon, but it's getting there. There we go. I did mention risks. So you can see I have rehearsed this, right? So there are some risks about hiring remotely, having remote teams, not having everyone in the same office. And again, it depends on the type of business you're running and what sort of culture you have within your environment. But, you know, people are concerned a little bit about loyalty. So where does my loyalty lie? If I'm in Cairo and I'm a software developer and I'm working from home and I can get paid, for argument's sake, $10 an hour from working in Cairo, actually I can do the same work, but I can do for another company in Los Angeles or London or Luanda, and I can get paid 5 times that. But I'm doing the same thing effectively, and I don't have to commute, and I might do different hours, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really bother me. So I think there's going to be a problem with loyalty, perhaps, and attrition. Attrition, it's going to happen. You know, without a shadow of a doubt. I have no qualms about that. There is a concern about IP, but I do think there are certain things that can be done to mitigate against that. And I think if you have the right sort of security protocols in place, then, you know, IP protection really shouldn't be too much of an issue. I appreciate if you're a more traditional bank, and that's probably more data protection than intellectual property. But there is something to consider. You know, what are the security protocols you're putting in place? And lastly, you know, cost. So what is the cost? And it's a difficult one. There are pros and cons to both, or wins and losses to both. You know, it could become more expensive to hire great talent, because if you're now not just competing with your local competitors, so your local banks or your local fintechs, you're actually now competing with global fintechs and global banks, then, you know, it's going to have an impact. Certainly for remuneration, for salaries, it will push that up in certain pockets, not in all. And, you know, the cost of hiring talent is going to go up. I really do believe that. So there's some of the things that I do think it's important to consider here. I'm going to move on, I think. Here we go. So again, just a few ideas here. This is really more thought-provoking than anything else, and I'm not promised. I promised Yasmin I wasn't going to pitch my services, and I'm not going to. But what I do think here is important is the current ways that organisations hire talent across the continent has to change. It's going to need to change. Like mums and pop shops that have had to go digital, that have had to have e-commerce. You're going to have to change the way you acquire talent. No longer is just posting an advert and praying that something's going to come back, that the best person is going to come back. They're not. You might get the best of the available person, of the available talent, but you're not going to get the best talent. And if you think you've got access to the globe, you've got access to anyone pretty much in any country, obviously with time zone and cost and linguistics dependent. Are you sure that by putting an advert in a local newspaper or on a local job board is going to work? I don't think so. Same applies for LinkedIn and social media. I mean, there is so much noise. Again, it's fairly customized to what you search for, and obviously the algorithms serve you up content based on your habits. But I know when I look on LinkedIn now, it's just, you can never find anything. Same as Twitter or Facebook. I mean, it's just so much. How are you going to get your job advert noticed? It's difficult. You have to spend quite a bit of money. And again, you're only really going to attract the active job seeker, not the passive, not the inactive. Passive and inactive is where, generally speaking, obviously, given what's happened, there's been quite a few people that have been, made redundant, retrenched, through no fault of their own, and are fantastic. There are exceptions, but again, the vast majority, certainly of people that can have a direct effect and can impact your business positively, they're going to be in jobs. They really are. Just going to flick that out. Okay, so generalist recruitment businesses, of which there are probably tens of thousands, they're going to be inundated because, generally speaking, they post an advert across multiple different job boards and LinkedIn's and what have you, and the masses come in. So it ends up you having to rely on keyword searches on CV. So if your CV doesn't say the word payments or fintech, you're not going to get through. It may say I work for a bank and I do financial technology. Now, unless that recruiter has been sort of smart enough and understands the sector enough to put in or banking or financial technology, you're not going to come up in the search. So if you're watching this and you're looking for a job, please, there's lots of free resources on my website geared towards how to optimize your LinkedIn profile or your CV. Please just go on there. I'll share the URL at the end. It's really important that you do that. And yeah, I mentioned, sorry, I keep flicking my screens because I've got my other screen above me. The last thing is that, interviewing based on CVs alone, it's something of the past, right? If you're just looking at a CV and you're going, yes, no, based on a CV, what is that telling you? How does a CV tell you about that person's personality, about their potential cultural fit, how they work from home, how productive they've been, how successful they've been? It doesn't tell you that. Generally speaking, CVs across the continent are pretty poor. They usually just cut and pasted job descriptions of what they were given when they first joined the business. Very, very few are thought out. So you're missing out on great talent, and there are some really low cost, streamlined ways of being able to assess people as they're applying for a job, or you're reaching out to them and asking them if they're interested in a job. So this is what I believe talent acquisition moving forward needs to look like, specifically in fintech. This is actually a system that we've designed, that we roll out, and that we use. So you have to understand your audience, like you do, like your marketing departments do. They understand your customers. They understand your customer personas, right? So your average customer may be a 25-year-old female with X income, right? Living in this particular, or living in urban areas. Now, that's the persona. You need to understand who your talent is, or who your potential targets are. As I've said, we now have access to the globe, and if you have the resources to go and do this on a global scale, then fantastic. I'd love to hear about it. But even if you start small and you start, within your country, or you start within your neighboring countries, or you start within the continent, you have to do that. You have to keep tabs on who are the better people, who are the best people. And there's numerous ways of doing that. Social listening is a really good way of doing that. Being at events, COVID-19 permitting. Again, just being able to understand who is doing what companies are doing well, who's winning awards, these sort of things. And I'm not a huge fan of industry awards, but I do think there is some merit. There's certainly some information and data you can get from those. Secondly, to be able to create a process where people are coming to you. You're not reaching out and saying, I've got this job, please can you apply? People are coming to you, even speculatively, saying, hey, listen, I've seen what you're doing. I've seen I'm a user of your app, or I'm a user of your bank. I love the way your customer experience is. I love the way that your UI is on your app. I love the way that your support team dealt with one of my concerns. All of these touch points within your business, they're all opportunities to, and I mentioned this earlier on about your brand, building your brand, to do that and to build an employer brand is so, so important. Again, we look at some of the leading fintechs on the planet, they have a huge brand. They spend an inordinate amount of time and money, of course, on that brand. But there are so many things you can do to try and get some inbound people. So people coming to you saying, I'd really love to work with you guys because, you've got a great business, or you've got a great mission. And that's the other thing that I think is really important as well. Mission statements that you may have, and the values. It might be worth dusting those off, and you probably may need to dust them off and search somewhere for them. Just have a look. Are they relevant? I'd be interested to find out, how relevant are they today to what they were when you wrote them 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 6 years ago, maybe even 60 years ago? Do they still apply to the world we live in now? Secondly, I mentioned this about, not relying on CVs. Use digital. If you're a fintech, you should be using digital. If you're not, then it's criminal. That rhymes. But you really should be using digital to try and get beyond the CV. So how does someone come across? What's their demeanor? If you set them questions, you might be able to set them some questions to answer, and you can look through in sequence. Again, to spend 30 seconds, 40 seconds listening to a couple of answers, you're going to get far more from that than you are from scoping over a CV for 10 or 15 seconds. I can absolutely assure you. Lastly is please don't try and automate the entire hiring process. Please don't do that. It doesn't work. AI can only take you so far. AI is great in fintech, by the way. So is machine learning. It's not very good at recruitment. It really isn't. We're still in a people business. You're one of your most important asset, apart from your PC or your laptop that you're working on, is the staff that you have. And without your staff, you don't have a product. You don't have a business. You have nothing. So please just remember, you can use automation for some parts of the early stage of the process, but not for all of it. It becomes very faceless. There's numerous studies that have been done that AI is not there yet to replace us. He says with a smile. And lastly, once you've gone through this funneling process, you'll come up with a shortlist. And again, using some digital tools, you can conduct your screening and your discussions about those particular candidates. You might whittle it down to 3 or 4, maybe 5. Discuss that as a team, and you can integrate this with Slack channels or Microsoft Teams or Google Chat or Trello or all of these other hundreds of tools that have sort of popped out and become really, really popular. But think about that. Think about how you would collaborate with your team remotely. And I'm not saying that everyone on this call is going to go back to or is going to stay remote forever. I'm not suggesting that at all. But think about speeding things up. All of the things I've spoken about for the last 25, 30 minutes about your brand, about how important it is to give a really good experience to people. It's about your brand as well. It's about your business. If someone applies for a job and they never hear back from you, do you think they're going to be interested in sort of downloading your app or using your product and service? Probably not. When a competitor comes along that actually has replied to them and said, hey, listen, thanks so much. Don't have anything for you at the moment, but look, here's some tips on how to write a CV, or here's some tips on how to do a digital interview. They're going to be remembered. I promise you that. And the chances are you'll probably lost the customer to a competitor. So just think about that when you're having these conversations internally. And lastly, when you've done all of this, when you've gone through this process and you've got to your top 1 or 2 people in your shortlist, please just try and be speedy, be quick to react. It says a lot about your business. If you procrastinate, A, you'll probably lose the person, and B, it just doesn't set a very good example of how your business is conducted. So every point, interviews and hiring is a two-way thing. People are looking at you, and you should be looking at them. So just be very, very conscious. Lastly, if you don't do any of this and you don't take anything I've said, and I think this is some crazy British man trying to take Africa, which I'm not, by the way. Well, I'm not trying to take Africa. I may be a crazy British man. But, if you don't do any of these things, you do run the risk of, losing market share. You run the risk of struggling to keep up with your customer demands and expectations. And, finally, you may not innovate. You may not innovate quick enough. I've seen that. Again, I'm not going to mention the company by name, but there is a payments company here in South Africa that were relatively traditional in terms of the service they offered. It was very point of sale orientated. They pivoted within 2 weeks to now do online payments. They saw a drop in transaction volumes of 90% the day after lockdown was announced. 90%. That's now gone way through the roof because they pivoted. How did they pivot? Of course, they've got great leadership, but they've got a fantastic team. They really have. And the team was able to come together, and they were able to quickly and very confidently, I think that's probably the best word, develop a new product within 2 weeks and get that to market. So this is what happens when you've got a great team. You can be nimble, you can innovate, and you can stay ahead of what's becoming just a super, super competitive space. I think that's about me done. I had a quick summary there. So supply and demand will determine what strategies you need to adopt. Hybrid operating models are set to be the new norm. I'm just going to pop around my screen because I can't remember the last one. Oh yes, culture is really important. How can I forget that? And last but by no means least, what I've seen from the vast majority of CEOs that I've spoken to over the last 2 or 3 weeks, they care. They really care. They care about their people. That's been one of the, I mentioned a bit earlier on what's keeping them up at night. Of course, attrition, losing people. But secondly, they do care about the well-being of their staff. And that's testament to people operating in this sector. We're all competitive, of course we are. And there's a competitive streak to us. But where we are today in the world, I think it's time that collaboration really happens, and that's something that I know Findexable and the African Women in Fintech and Payments movements, all of these organizations and associations and the African Fintech Network, it's about just bringing this ecosystem together and trying to help each other, because we're not out of the woods yet. There's still a bit to go, I'm afraid. So thank you very much for listening. It's been my pleasure just talking at a screen for the last 45 minutes. If you'd like to connect with me, here's my details. The picture on the left is before Corona or before COVID-19, and I've decided to grow a beard because why not? It's not like I'm going out to meet anyone, so I thought I'd grow a beard. You can find me obviously on LinkedIn. Please, if you'd like to follow me on LinkedIn, if you can just drop me a note saying, you heard me on this Facebook channel, that'd be great. I get hundreds of messages or requests, and I don't necessarily accept them all. You can drop me an email, feel free to, or what's the last one? Oh yeah, you can visit our website. If you do visit our website, as I said to you, there's the resources page there where you can not only find more content about how to optimize your CV and optimize your LinkedIn profile, but if you are looking to hire talent, there's quite a bit of resource there in terms of budget calculators and guides and what have you. So feel free just to have a look. All of that is readily available. Thank you very, very much. I hope the team, Yasmin and her team, are still there.
We're there. Thanks, Darren, a lot. Thanks a lot for the interesting talk, and most importantly, for opening our minds to new ways of thinking. Actually, we all have to think differently as COVID-19 changed the whole world we've been experiencing and working at. So I'm well assured that today's webinar will be of a great value to all our audience, customers, and followers. Thanks, Darren, a lot. Thanks a lot.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you very, very much. And I wish everyone well, and we'll speak soon.
So I want to re-encourage all of our followers and customers to keep checking our website and Facebook page to stay updated, as we have a lot of upcoming webinars and events, and stay safe.